Hello and welcome to The Punt, a new monthly show brought to you by The42 and William Hill that looks ahead to the major Irish sporting events at home and abroad. Please gamble responsibly, and for more information, visit dunlewy.net. I'm Gavin Casey and I'm joined today to discuss Ireland's Euro 2020 playoff against Slovakia by Gavin Cooney of The42. Gav, how are things there?
Not bad, Gav. Cheers.
Very good. And we're delighted to be joined as well by two very special guests, two guest panelists. David Sneyd, how are things, Dave?
Morning, Gav. All good here. Hope things are well.
Excellent. All good here as well. Thanks. And Johnny Ward, the man with the betting nous, who will be making us money, I think, by the end of this show. Johnny, how are things with you?
Not so bad, Gav. Yeah, hoping for some good news on the old lockdown and non-lockdown front in the next while. So life goes on at the moment, anyway.
Yeah, hopefully there will be sport being played in Bratislava still at that point. Whatever about back here, we're going to chat about Dundalk's qualification for the Europa League group stages as well, and what we can expect from them in the group stage. But to kick us off, Gav, might start with yourself. It's the playoff that kind of feels like it's taken an eternity to come around. We've been waiting for a long time. In other circumstances, we'd have had a different manager going into this one. So it kind of plays into the craziness of the last 6 months that here we are under Stephen Kenny trying to qualify for Euro 2020, which will take place in 2021. What kind of what do you expect from Ireland in this game? Like when we look at what they did under Stephen Kenny in his first two games in charge, like how much of that sort of free-spirited passing play can we expect in a game of this magnitude where everything is on the line? Do you expect them to revert to type a little bit more, or will they continue with what we saw under Kenny in those first two games?
Well, if we're to believe Stephen Kenny, Gav, we're going to play as they tried to play in the Nations League games against Bulgaria and against Finland. Because the difficult thing about this, like, Kenny isn't given to pessimism or expectation management. But at the same time, he did say if we were to qualify for the Euros through these playoffs, it would be an extraordinary achievement. And I actually don't think that that's him managing expectations ahead of time. I think he's being pretty realistic there. Like, we'd have to win 2 away games in a row, and we've won 4 away games, competitive away games, since the Euros in 2016. Before, that was back before the entire world started going to pot, and 2 of those were away to Moldova and Gibraltar. So we have an absolutely wretched record away from home. And we asked Kenny about this on Sunday, and one of the reasons he said was, well, he implied it, that we were too reactive in these games, that we have to be proactive and we have to go out and try to dominate possession. So that's what he'll do. That's in his makeup to do it. I know you talk about reverting to type, and that might be seen as the pragmatic thing to do, but Kenny views keeping possession as the pragmatic thing to do. So that's what we'll try and do. It's also what Slovakia will try and do. Like, they're quite a possession-based team, as Kenny describes them. So it'll be 2 teams trying to do pretty much the same thing on Thursday.
And like, when I say reverting to type as well, look, Kenny's type is to do what they have been doing in the last couple of games, and probably to do it better. Obviously, they're only getting acclimatized to it. But Dave, from the players' perspective, I suppose, when there is more on the line and there is a place at the Euros up for grabs here, can you imagine them giving the same amount of buy-in that we saw in those first 2 games, which was like actually pretty steadfast? Even when it wasn't going especially well, they stuck to it. We saw Shane Duffy having his struggles and so on. Or could you kind of imagine them subconsciously reverting to their type, I suppose, or what they've been used to over the last couple of years, if it's a case of Slovakia putting Ireland under pressure and things getting a little bit hairy?
I think that could be the easiest thing in the world for some of the players to do, is especially if maybe confidence isn't the highest. Because it's always like the 2 Nations League games, we kind of, in the first game away from home in Bulgaria, there was promising signs. There was lots of possession. The second game at home just wasn't quite as promising. You're hoping that to see them build on it. And there was moments in the goal in Bulgaria and even Finland as well, where the midfield was just very easily cut through. I think the messaging, like Gav alluded to it there as well, just by saying it, in terms of like the messaging from Stephen Kenny is going to be to keep doing what they've been building towards already, in terms of how he wants them to play. He's not going to accept lads taking the easy option and taking the easy way out. And if a lack of confidence, if they start the game well and can play themselves into it, which I think they'll be able to do, I don't think Slovakia are the type of team who are going to put Ireland under a huge amount of possession, high up the pitch, pressure high up the pitch. I think they'll allow Ireland to have the ball in areas where Ireland won't be able to do much damage. It's going to be when Ireland try and break the lines, would be the technical way of describing it. When Ireland try to actually penetrate, that's when you'll see Slovakia's maybe defensive midfield, and also just the defense kind of kick into gear and maybe kind of put Ireland under more pressure. So it's I think the fact that it's going to be played in an empty stadium, we've seen it in a lot of the games so far, like the natural tempo to all the games. We've seen it even in the Premier League. It's just not the same. Like, it's gonna be, I think it will be a little bit easier for Ireland to settle into this game unless they do something silly early on and find themselves going down. It's just a case of what midfield he settles on, because obviously he played two big different sets of players in midfield in the two Nations League games. So it just depends on what kind of formula he settles upon and how those players settle into the game early, because as you say, like, there is so much riding on it, but they can't go into it thinking or having that fear of being crippled by that fear of, we'll be making a mistake. I don't think Kenny Moynihan's players making mistakes so long as they're done almost in the right way for the right reasons. So I don't think he's going to be like instilling fear in the players, saying we can't do this, we can't do that, we have to keep it tight. Obviously, he'll be saying those things about the importance of being solid, but he's not going to be just saying do it simple, don't make stupid mistakes. He's going to be encouraging his players to play how he wants them, and it's just how Ireland settle into that pattern early on, because they did it very well in Sofia, not so well at home. So that's what's going to be interesting in the first, say, 10-15 minutes of the game, is just how Ireland settle into it.
Let's get into the midfield then, Johnny. Do you fear Ireland's midfield? I suppose you could look at that two ways, but like, which kind of a combination would you be opting for here, based on what you've seen from Kenny's Ireland in those first two games, or maybe based on what you've seen of other players who didn't quite feature? I'm sure we'll get into Jack Byrne at some point, but which midfield would you pick for Bratislava?
Whatever midfield you pick, it'll be flawed, it'll be limited, and it'll go into the game under a bit of a cloud, because Ireland's midfield hasn't played well really for a long time. Den Whelan is kind of out of the picture now. James McCarthy has come in, didn't play well in Bulgaria. I still think they'll probably go with that three: Hourihan, Hendrick and McCarthy. Presuming Jack Byrne isn't playing, I don't think he will be playing. Set pieces are still probably our most likely route to a goal, which is pretty sad, but statistically that does look to be the case. In which case Hourihan will be absolutely vital from set pieces. He's a smashing striker of the ball from 25 yards in front of goal, as we saw as well. At Lansdowne Road before. So I think he'll play. Hendrick will play, and that then leaves the other option, which is probably going to be James McCarthy, who comes off the back of a hiding against Chelsea, obviously. Not his biggest fan, to be honest, but at the moment I think he's probably the likely player in that position. I've sympathy for Kenny, because he had two games, very quick games, to kind of put his MO in place, and there were good signs, but obviously, I thought the Finland game was disappointing. But I would say, getting to the point, and Gavin was asked about this, in terms of Gavin Cooney was asked about the extraordinary achievement. I thought that was probably the most interesting line of his press conference, because it's really manifestly nonsense. Ireland are going to play Slovakia at effectively behind closed doors. To me, it makes almost no difference that this game's in Slovakia versus the Aviva Stadium. Ireland probably played better against Bulgaria than they did against Finland. We tend to perform above expectations more away from home than we do at home. There are no fans there. So Ireland have to beat Slovakia and then Bosnia or Northern Ireland behind closed doors. There's nothing extraordinary about winning two games like that with the help of possibly penalties. Do you know what I mean? So it's not extraordinary at all. And Slovakia are a team that are clearly there for the taking, looking at their group games. They conceded a lot of goals against Croatia. What I've heard back from what they're expecting in terms of Slovakia is that they'll have a lot of the ball, but they are there to be exploited defensively. Ireland will go over there thinking they've roughly a 50-50 chance. If they win that, they'll be thinking they've a very strong chance of beating Bosnia or Northern Ireland. So there's nothing extraordinary at all about the challenge ahead of us. And against that, I couldn't say I'm confident, because there hasn't been enough in this Ireland team for a long time. I mean, we don't really beat good teams full stop. We managed to beat Austria away under Mark O'Neill's reign. We beat Germany at home, but these games are outliers as well. And I'm sure if the XG were consulted, we shouldn't be winning the Germany game at home. But I don't know, to be honest. It's whatever team we put out there, you can pick holes in it. And Stephen Kenny is going to need an awful lot longer than 2 games to inculcate his belief and system in a set of players that have basically been diffident for a long time, to my mind.
And just to build on what Johnny's saying there about the preparation time, Gav, like there's a farcical lack of preparation time for this game, because we've had the 2 games in the last window, but he's essentially got 1 more training session, because 11 of the squad were playing league games on Sunday. So they land Sunday night, Monday morning. They don't train the day after playing a league game. So there's really a training session Tuesday, but they fly out to Bratislava that day. They can't do a whole lot the night of the match, and then kick off on Thursday night. So for that reason, I think you'll see like the team selection will be pretty similar to what we saw in the Nations League games at the start of September. And I think the midfield spots are probably the most interesting, because that's what he rotated between the 2 games. But what we saw 6 different midfielders play. So I think it'll be 3 from those 6, assuming that Harry Arter is fit, which isn't a definite at this stage.
Which 3 of those 6 would you select? Or sorry, Dave, go for it.
No, I was going to just make the point. Obviously, the midfield, but I think what could be have a major impact is David McGoldrick coming in for Alameda. So like Alameda was impressive. I know we're jumping here from midfield forward, but that's going to also be just a big aspect in terms of, as well as Eda did with holding the ball up at certain moments and then laying things off and keeping certain attacks flowing. McGoldrick is obviously a much more experienced player. He's a much more, I think he's a different player. He's more about him in terms of being able to have that link between the midfield and the forwards. And why that's important is, I kind of made this point over the weekend, but it's so important that the midfield that Kenny chooses are able to get those passes into McGoldrick's feet. Kenny has spoken about this in terms of the 4-3-3, and that one, the fulcrum in the middle of that attacking tree. That's why McGoldrick is going to be so important, because he has the capability to obviously drop off and link that play so well, and then create more attacks with, say, if you've got an Aaron Connolly, or on the left-hand side, waiting to see who'll be on the right. Well, obviously, Callum O'Dowd unlikely to, but not going to feature. So, like, that's going to be just as important, and that's why I think the midfield even has more of an onus on it now, is to be able to get those passes in and to not, as you said at the very start, revert to type, and they have to constantly look for him, because McGoldrick has this. Can be a bit of a frustrating habit where he actually drops too deep when the passes aren't coming into him, because he just wants to get the ball. So if midfielders, like I say, James McCarthy is only playing sideways passes or 5 and 6 yard passes ahead of him, you're going to have a situation where McGoldrick is going to be getting frustrated and dropping deep. So that's why the onus will be on those lads, the likes of, if it's Jeff Hendrick or Conor Howlahan, who would be more likely is to fizz those balls in, because the higher up the pitch McGoldrick is, then the less pressure is going to be, because that means then the whole team can then condense, because I don't think it'd be too much of a threat in terms of in behind. So obviously other than Connolly. So I think that having that for a forward like McGoldrick coming in, which will probably replace Ida as well as he did for his international debut, that's going to put even so much more pressure on the midfield. And McCarthy said he's not going to. McCarthy days. It's like Stephen Kenny said he's not going to be overly cautious, but that'll tell in his selection. Like, it'd be a huge call to put someone like Jack Byrne in, but if you are honestly looking at that midfield group of midfielders, and Jack Byrne is obviously playing with Shamrock Rovers, so he's not at a higher level as the other fellas around him on a weekly basis. But if you're looking at midfielders who are capable of getting on the ball and always wanting to be progressive and take risks with forward passes, because there's no harm in risks with forward passes. There isn't. If you lose it, you're losing it further up the pitch. It's fine. Like, Jack Byrne is someone who has better qualities than lads who are playing the Premier League in terms of that thought process. It's just whether or not Stephen Kenny will throw him in. Like, he was sitting just a few rows in front of me at the AC Milan game in the Europa League, and obviously at times like Jack Byrne sometimes he can get a kick just because the midfield was being overrun with AC Milan. They were obviously able to play around him. But there was times when Rovers did have the ball, Jack Byrne in those little moments did create stuff. He created a great chance for Aaron Green. He kept the ball moving when he did have it. He very rarely did actually give it away or look as if he was like not capable of mixing it. It was just the lads around him. So like it would be a wild card call to throw him in, considering he wasn't even included in the Nations League squads. But I don't think someone like him can be totally discounted in that midfield if you're going to get the most out of someone like David McGoldrick, who can properly have Ireland playing football.
Surely, Johnny, if anybody could recognise those qualities that Byrne brings to the table that even a Premier League midfielder might not, it would be Stephen Kenny. Like, I feel as though we've been on this road before so many times. There's always a sort of a maverick. Well, we almost perceive them to be maverick creative player because it's so at odds with what Ireland do, generally speaking, and they get left out for games, whether it was Wes, Andy Reid before him. Byrne, I'm not sure Byrne is quite in that bracket yet, in that there's not quite so much of a public clamour for his inclusion, but it just does feel as though if he was a better midfielder overall, I guess, than some of the guys that have been starting for Ireland in midfield, then he'd be starting, because Stephen Kenny isn't averse to including a League of Ireland player in his squad, I'm sure. You know, like, there's absolutely no reason for him to be. He's actually the antithesis of that. So what am I missing about Byrne here? What like, why isn't he, I guess, starting in that midfield? Presuming he doesn't, because we don't think he will.
No, I don't think he will. I suppose if you watch the second goal Shamrock Rovers got the other night, Jack Byrne's pass for Graham Burke, I'll defy anyone who tells me that wasn't world class on the level of the pass, and also the touch from Graham Burke. The problem is they were playing Sligo Rovers, and if you put Graham Burke into the Shamrock Rovers AC Milan game, Graham Burke was completely out of his depth in terms of his ability to get around the pitch and basically do stuff off the ball. That's a problem for Jack as well. Jack doesn't really have that sort of athleticism and pace that would make him an even better player than he is. And I still think he's, like, in terms of technical ability, I think he's pretty much world class, some of the stuff he can do on the ball. But he's very unproven at this level. You know, his time for Ireland was a couple of games. One was better than the other. The Bulgaria game was quite good, and he's very good on the ball. But I think it's probably, as much as I'm a big fan, I think it's probably a bit of a gamble bringing him in a game like this. I wouldn't be amazed if he came off the bench at some stage, because his corner kick delivery to me is as good as you'll see anywhere. He's absolutely brilliant from corner kicks, and set pieces in general, he would be a big player. And if we did need to possibly unlock the Slovaks' defence, those who argue that Jack should be playing, the easy argument they would make is, what are the likes of Hendrick and Horan actually doing for Ireland? You know, and I would argue that they've been basically disappointing. You know, Horan doesn't get on the ball enough, and this is probably an issue with him at Villa as well. Hendrick just has been very disappointing since for 2 or 3 years for Ireland now. So Jack has a case. It's just, I don't think Ken, like, as much as we can talk about this or that, basically what matters for Kenny here is getting through the game. It doesn't matter how we play. It's getting to the Euros. And his philosophy is one thing, but Dundalk were quite pragmatic in some of their European games when they needed to be as well. So I think Jack will possibly play some role. I don't see him starting. And I do think, as much as I love him as a player, I think he's a great personality as well to have around. I think in terms of working off the ball, there will probably be better options in that midfield, and I think Kenny will go with the tried and trusted. So I don't really see him playing as much as I think if he came on, he'd do something.
Gav, what's your midfield for the game if you're in Stephen Kenny's shoes, and based on what you've seen of those first 2 games of Kenny's tenure, which of the 3 midfielders do you pick out of that 6 that have featured?
I'm getting nostalgic for 2016, but I'd go with the Euros trio of McCarthy, Hendrick and Brady. Assuming now Brady hasn't been fully fit. You know, he sustained some genre of rib injury against Finland, played I think a game and a half maybe for Burnley, and then was an unused sub in the game against Newcastle on Saturday. But I think he'll play there. Kenny has always talked about wanting a left footer in that midfield 3. So that's usually, you know, Hourihan and Brady have been the left-footed players that have started there so far. So I do think he'll go for either of those. Hourihan is less convincing on the ball, and I don't think he offers enough off it to earn his place out of Brady. I think he lacks athleticism at times. You saw that in the awful goal that we conceded again in Bulgaria. He was too slow to react and too slow to track back. So I think Brady, you could see like there's been so little preparation time in the training area, and I think Kenny has to be somewhat consistent with his team selection from the Nations League games to try and build some kind of cohesion and rhythm, just for his own sake as much as anything else. And you could see that what they were trying to do was, with Brady, Doherty would push way further up on the right flank than Enda Stevens. It's almost like tilting the pitch. So that gives a left footer like Brady, just more angles for passes in that little pocket of space that he'll have in the left in the midfield three. So you can go, inside to Connolly between the opposition right back and the centre back. You can go out wide to Stevens, like McGoldrick can drop off. You've just more angles for passes that way. And I think Ireland need more creativity in midfield. And I think Brady will probably get the nod in that respect, assuming he's fit and raring to go over Howrahan. And I think I would go for that as well. I'd be surprised if Byrne makes the squad. I hope he does. I think, like Johnny said, he's worth for his set piece delivery alone. Like, since we mentioned that Austria game, like, the only player that scored more than one competitive goal for Ireland since then is Shane Duffy. Like, so that remains our best hope of scoring a goal against these guys. And Byrne's delivery is as good, if not better, than anyone else's in the squad. So you'd have him around for that. I mean, you might think he's one of the reasons Mick McCarthy didn't pick Byrne for competitive games. He was always moaning that when he sees Byrne for Shamrock Rovers, he's dropping too deep. He's almost dropping into a sixth position, taking the ball off the centre halves and advancing up the field with that. He doesn't want that for Byrne because he won't get that space in international football. So maybe that's part of Kenny's thinking on Byrne. I don't know. I think the fact that he's right-footed mightn't help him either. So I'd be surprised if Byrne made the squad. I hope he does. And I think if I were Stephen Kenny, I'd be starting Brady over Howrahan.
Dave, what about your midfield three? Would you go along with Gavs there, or would you make any amendments to it?
Do you know what? Like, ideally, it'd be a midfield of someone like, I don't know, Roy Keane, Mark Kinsley, and Matt Holland. It's mad. We have these conversations all the time, and Johnny touched on it. We are extremely limited with the caliber of players we have. So we have Jeff Hendrick, who's playing in the Premier League for Newcastle because he was a free transfer and Burnley messed up there. Like, he is a solid Premier League player who tends to be very limited, but then he scores that great goal for Newcastle on his debut, and then everyone talks about what he did at the Euros and can he get that? But that seems to have been actually not his regular kind of standard. Those performances are not where he gets to on a consistent basis. If Kenny is able to work on him and get more out of Hendrick, then you could see someone like who is more of a player. And you do need, like, Kenny has spoken about this. I remember, I think it was like his first proper kind of press conference as the Ireland manager on a Zoom call at the start of lockdown. And he was asked about what he sees as for midfield. And he went off and gave like a 9-minute answer. It was like a soliloquy of love towards midfielders and what he wants from his midfielders. And he, as much as he says, yeah, obviously players have to be able to go on the half turn and pass the ball, but he said that very flippantly. But like, there's Irish players who can't do that. Like, there's Irish players who actually aren't capable of, well, they should be capable of it, but maybe in an Ireland jersey something just happens to them where they just become overruled by fear. But he more so what he sees for his midfield, especially when he's matching the team, say 4-3-3, which will probably be the case here against Slovakia, who play the same formation, is he wants his term that he kept on repeating was fluidity of movement in terms of from his midfield. So players like Jeff Hendrick would then, and obviously say someone like Robbie Brady would have the benefit of that over Howrahan because they are just more mobile, and also just having that ability to kind of maybe different kind of sets of interplay and switching around the positions a little bit and allowing that space for, he was talking about the fullbacks then pushing up boy. That's another aspect here. You really haven't seen, obviously Matt Doherty's going to play there right back because the whole James Coleman thing has been taken out of the equation. But also he needs to try and get even a bit more from Enda Stevens in that attacking sense, because both fullbacks, there is still much more to come from them. But in terms of that midfield, I do think I was right as well. I can see it being say maybe a James McCarthy in there, Jeff Hendrick, and maybe a Robbie Brady if Brady is fit enough to actually feature. I think it'd be a tight call. As much when I was saying that about Jack Byrne earlier, like, again, realistically, I don't see him starting, just because on a week to week level, he's not having the same demands put on him as the other players. That's just the nature of it. So as much as I do think he is technically a better footballer than some of the players who are in that squad, these lads are operating weekly on a higher level. So yeah, it was good to see him that AC Milan game sporadically look decent, but like we've seen him linked this morning to move to Bournemouth or Stoke City. He does, and it's, as much as we would all have a graph for the League of Ireland, you can't get away from the fact that the League of Ireland is not a proper basis to be based on a midfielder for our international team on a week-to-week basis, because the weekly challenges just aren't there. So as much as we see him do great things in terms of passing, if he's able to build on that, which hopefully if he has the ability technically to do it, it's just about kicking on mentally as much as that in terms of his career. And then we could see Jack Byrne featuring in these debates a lot more promisingly, in the sense of if he's going to play, because it is we talk about when Stephen Kenny came in, it's almost like this great culture war now in Irish football about the future of it, what is the future. But in this instance, this is a European semi-final to get into a final, so you have to there is an element too where you have to, as what Gav said, which is actually a very good point too. I don't mean to be surprised that Gav made such a good point, but like, he does need to kind of show, not just like rip things up again. He does need to have that kind of a little bit of consistency in terms of selection, just so you're building on things, because there's such, again, Gav made another very good point, there's such a lack of preparation point in terms of on the training pitch, that the last thing he needs to do is actually overhaul things, because that could just lead to disaster, and then God knows what could come down the line. Because there was already, after the Finland game, there was already murmurings in the press box, sniping in the press box from people who just are dying, literally waiting for Kenny to make a mess of things. It's like, it's mad to see it. It's actually mad to see up close the mentality of some people, but that's what's coming down the line from. Hopefully he's not. Hopefully Stephen Kenny isn't kind of thinking of that in terms of, oh, if we do this, I'm gonna be slaughtered or whatever. But he is a man of principles, and hopefully the courage of those convictions will eventually shine through. But I don't know. It's just this midfield. It is a big problem unless Kenny can somehow work on them, and in the space of a day, give them confidence or give them some extra belief to be more than the sum of their parts, because it's gonna just be a very kind of tight game, because Slovakia are ranked 36th or ranked 37th, so it should be a very even game. It shouldn't be a game where Ireland are totally outclassed, and I don't think it will be. It's just whether or not they're actually capable of putting in a performance that is good enough to kind of get past a team like Slovakia, who are, even though it's behind closed doors, they are still at home and they are slight favourites.
Dave, at the risk of ripping a hole in the space-time continuum, can I ask you about the culture war briefly? I know we're trying to talk about the actual football, but I think it'd be negligent of me to not ask you to kind of elaborate on your interpretation of that, what you've seen in the press box and so on. Where does it come from? From what place in a person does this come from? I
don't know. Like, it's just like, if Ireland, or like this game against Slovakia is a sort of game where Ireland could easily lose 1-0 by playing the exact same way they played for the last 20 years, or they could lose 1-0 by trying to actually play differently. It's just what you want from your team. Like, Ireland it's made this point as well, as like people are saying, like, one of the comments was like, so much for the revolution after Stephen Kenny's second game, and you're kind of thinking, like, cop yourselves on here, because like, what? He's not.
Is this person a sports journalist, a soccer journalist, or does he or she have any understanding of how this works?
Well, it's someone who was in the press box, so like, you can make up your own conclusions. But it's like, my thinking on it would be, obviously you have to win football matches. That's clear. That's obvious. How often have Ireland done that over the last 20 years? You know what I mean? Like, it's not as if Stephen Kenny is coming in and doing a Brian Clough going into Leeds United and saying, right lads, throw your medals in the bin here. Like, what? Like, Ireland have achieved sporadic results. Like the Germany game, yeah, that was great. Then you go to the Euros, but then, like, it's pretty much a one-off. You go to Euro 2012, just get destroyed in 3 games. Before that, you go to 2002 World Cup. You've nothing in between that. So, like, Stephen Kenny isn't coming in and ripping up this grand master plan of Irish football, and that's been working for the last 20 odd years. Like, he's coming in and sort of thinking, oh, this needs a bit of a change here. This needs something, a different way of thinking. It'll probably still lead to the same conclusions down the line. Maybe I don't think anyone expects Ireland to win every game and qualify for every tournament. Like, you'd be delusional to be thinking like that. But I think it's fair to expect. Well, actually, hold on. You've got Premier League players. You've got some championship players, but not as many as there have been previously. The Championship is still a very competitive league. Well, you've got Premier League players there. I think it's fair to actually say, well, we need to get more from them. We can't just be thinking of the old school thinking of, we nick it, we keep it tight, blah, blah, blah. There needs to be more. There needs to be a bit more of a plan, rather than just paying a few million quid to a big name manager who's coming towards the end of his career, or another manager who can't get a club job because, like, it's been so frustrating over the last while, thinking that, like, it's some of the commentary around it is almost as if, like, Stephen Kenny is going to be like destroying Irish football, and you're sort of thinking, like, it's been broken for years. You know what I mean? From nearly every facet of it needs some sort of overhaul, because for everything from, say, schoolboy football all the way through has just been broken. And, like, Stephen Kenny isn't going to be able to do all that himself. If he can prove and he can show that there's Irish players that are capable of actually playing football a different way and having a bit more belief in themselves and a bit more confidence, hopefully it has a bit of a trickle down effect. But overall, there just needs to be just major changes, and that's not going to obviously happen. That's not going to happen this week in Slovakia. But little things like being actually capable of going to Slovakia and not bending over and saying, right, just hopefully, like, do your worst. You know what I mean? Go there and give them problems. Like, Ireland haven't gone to play against teams and look to actually cause teams problems. They're being so reactive. Like, some of the games you go to, and it's just horrible to sit through, because you do feel a lot of these lads are playing in the Premier League. Why is it like this? Why is the mentality like this? And, like, you just hope for the future in terms of what Stephen Kenny can do, that he can just inject that little bit more belief into a group of players. I think there's players there now who actually will fall in line with him. I don't think you're going to have the same questions that you see, like, stuff that comes out with the likes of Jason McAteer and Ian Hart having a go and stuff. Like, you just need to ignore people like that now for the time being. They have their biases, they have their kind of, they're in certain camps, but they're not important to Irish football anymore. The people who are important to Irish football are the likes of Damien Duff, Keith Andrews, Stephen Kenny. Obviously, but behind that in 21s, you've got John Trajan Crawford and stuff even below that. So that's what's important now. It's not listening to so much of the outside noise. It's trying to put a plan in place to bring things forward, because I think there's so much more that can be got out of Irish football.
There's more that can be gotten out of our fullbacks as well, Johnny. I think Dave alluded to it earlier, or it might have been actually yourself, Gav, with all of your good points. But Enda Stevens in particular, first couple of games there under Kenny, he just looked very static. Like, it's like he couldn't be released in any way. You know, he was just taking the ball static, kind of passing it backwards, and wasn't in any way freed up. And obviously, the Doherty conundrum, if you want to call it that, has been fairly well fleshed out at this stage. It might be a formation issue. It might be that his form isn't quite what it was last season as he acclimatises at a new club, but he will be playing in the position now that Coleman is ruled out. So what do you make of that full-back situation for Ireland, and how do we get more out of it?
Yeah, Enda Stevens wasn't great now, I have to say, in the games since he came in. I thought defensively he was pretty ropey against Bulgaria, and it's a major culture shock for the two fullbacks. Not so much Doherty, because he hasn't really been playing for Ireland, but we basically played with four fullbacks for a lot of our last 20 years, you know, and they've had so much cover, and this is different now. They're basically, you're playing a different system where you have three midfielders and two wide players who are essentially kind of strikers for much of the game. So they're not going to necessarily give the lads as much cover. So it's a lot tougher for the fullbacks. Sheffield United haven't made a great start to the season. Haven't seen them play, to be honest. Obviously McGoldrick scored, but you know, it's going to be a tougher season for them. It's going to be a tougher season for Stevens. Doherty, it's difficult for him, because we're only speculating as to who plays on the right. Whoever it is, Doherty isn't going to know him very well. You've three midfielders who themselves still mentally aren't in the right place to be sort of demanding the ball from the fullbacks. But if you're looking at, I expect Connolly to play in the left. If you're looking at Connolly to play in the left, he could dovetail very well with Stevens. It's just, if we have Stevens making these runs to support Connolly, we need our midfielders to be able to say, and our centre backs to be able to say, we have this covered if this breaks down. Because that's going to be an issue. When Ireland lose the ball, and this is one of the big things with Mick McCarthy, it was like, if we lose possession, we'll have it fairly stacked in our favour that we limit the damage if we do. With Kenny, you could see in the two games, if we lose possession, our midfield can suddenly be as open as the Red Sea. So the fullbacks have an important role to play, and I would agree with you, Gavin. I don't. I've massive faith in Doherty. I think he's a top player. Maybe not brilliant defensively. And Stevens himself is probably not the best defender in the world at times as well. But I'd have slight concerns about Stephen's form so far, and the fact that they have a culture shock with this system, because they don't have James McLean coming back as an auxiliary left half or whatever you want to call him. They don't have the guy on the right coming back and helping Doherty. They don't have Seamus Coleman, who's better defensively. So it is for me, it's an area that we should probably hasn't been given an awful lot of attention, particularly Stephen's performance in the first couple of games. Gave the ball away a lot as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the perception of it, Gav, between Coleman and Doherty would be that Doherty is the better attacker. He scored lots of goals, obviously, in the Premier League. And yet, based on what we've seen of them, both of them so far in the Premier League this season, I think Seamus Coleman is on current form actually a better attacker as well. I'm not sure what Doherty really offers this Ireland team at the moment. And like it could change in the space of a game. But had there been a fit Seamus Coleman for Stephen Kenny to contend with, do you think he would have reversed that big call to drop his captain when he took the reins? Could you have seen him go for Coleman over Doherty on form?
Yeah, I think he was probably going to pick Doherty, to be honest, and stick with the call. Like Kenny had made his mind up about that Doherty Coleman decision a long time ago, as in at least at the beginning of this year, he was always going to start Doherty over Coleman. And Coleman's had a great season, a great start to the season. But, you know, I think it is easier to look good going forward when James Rodriguez is in front of you, rather than, you know, who's Doherty been playing in front of in a quite unfamiliar role in an unfamiliar team. The thing about the fullbacks, like Doherty and Stevens, are two, if you were to judge them on club form, are two of our best players. But we are asking them to do completely different roles in the international team than what they do in their club team. Like Doherty was interesting talking about this last week. He was talking about adapting to going to a back four rather than playing as a wing back. And he said, yeah, I've had absolutely loads to learn. It's just in terms of positioning, especially when they're without the ball. You know, he made it seemed pretty obvious, but I guess it has to be learned. It's like, there's just much less cover. And like most of the two Ireland goals that Ireland have conceded under Kenny so far, there's massive amounts of space between Duffy, the right centre half, and Doherty.
On that point, Gavin, like it's so true. Like, so say if you're playing wing back, you make this marauding run. You have three centre backs who may well have to deal with one striker, right? So the left and right side, basically, they can fairly willingly cover. And now you have two lads who play wing backs coming into what's itself a kind of a dysfunctional team anyway. And now they're playing full backs without the cover of the midfielder ahead of them.
And like we've talked about the team, we haven't really talked about the system yet. I don't think he'll change from the 4-3-3, but like you look at a 3-5-2 formation, and every time I look at him, like that solves most of our problems. You know, it gets Doherty and Stevens back at wing back. You could play Coleman if he was fit. You get more people in midfield around McCarthy. Connolly could play centrally. You know, McGoldrick plays that system in his club. But and Kenny, like he says, he's open to everything. He could change the system, but I really don't think. I think he'll probably stick with the old 4-3-3 this week. Just to go back to what I was saying earlier, it's just, you know, it allows him to build on something. You know, it allows the September games to stand for something if he sticks with that formation this time around. But I just wonder how much thought he's given to changing that system, and maybe he'll do it in the games to follow, but probably not for Slovakia.
Yeah, Dave, how much elasticity is there in Kenny, do you think? Like, he is a fairly headstrong guy. He's impervious to outside noise, or so he says, but he also, as Gav mentions, claims to be open to change of formation. It might not be the game to do it, in fairness, but is that possibly where Ireland's future lies? And also, how applicable is that system to Kenny? Like, how used to it would he be, or how would he be able to go about using it?
Like when he was, if you look at it, when he was Dundalk manager, he wasn't really one for tinkering. He would have played his same 11 like quite regularly. Now, obviously, we've seen it in international football. You have to be willing to. Obviously, you're going to have to, because of nature. We've seen it with Coleman. There's so much that is out of your command in the sense of like players that are playing for their club. If they're not, that obviously it is a factor. Well, Gav is right. Like you look at like 3-5-2 would be something that just makes sense. It's not as if it's a random call thinking, right, look, this hasn't worked. I'll try this. Like 3-5-2 is something that looking at it would make sense. But again, it's also he hasn't tried it yet. He will stick with what he's gone with so far, and just to kind of give that sense of just kind of, I don't know, just not feeling that he's ripping it up again. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think, because he is still only a couple of games in, but like And also, I think even from the point of view of the relationship so far between Duffy and Egan, like it hasn't been great. Like they do look as if that's going to be the partnership, but they're still, like there's talk about the two of them being in contact and stuff, just working on different things. But that can only really be done on a training pitch and stuff. So like that's a partnership that at the moment doesn't look too steady, even though they're two very good defenders. I think it'll be seen down the line if Kenny decides the two formations that he seems to favour are the 4-3-3 and also maybe 4-2-3-1. That could also maybe work. But even that point that Gav made about Connolly from a central position, like he obviously played wide so far, but like when you play for Brighton and the games that seen him in, he has done the most damage like in a central position, and obviously he can drift out wide. He is someone who Ireland, we talk about kind of obviously before about kind of set pieces being the best way of just of scoring goals, but we haven't had someone like Connolly for a while who has that just blistering pace, who can get in behind, and just also is a very good finisher too. Although there was a couple of moments in Bulgaria where maybe he didn't show that. So I think the fact is there are options. When you're an international manager, you have to be open. You have to be open to try different things when so much can be out of your control, in the sense of if players come in injured. You're kind of so much of it is out of your hands. But I do think he'll go to 4-3-3 in Bratislava. I don't think he's going to rip things up and try something different.
Gav, what do we know about the Slovaks? And by we, I of course mean you. You've put in the hard yards there, researching them. Like, are they decent shakes, good shakes, great shakes? Where are they in the shake stakes?
I would assume no great shakes in the shake stakes. They're decent, like Kenny was saying on Sunday. They're going to be a pretty possession-based team. Like, I mean, I read now I say I'd put the hard yards. Stephen Finn on Twitter really put the hard yards because he's got a good blog on opposition analysis in Slovakia. But only 14 sides across all of UEFA's 55 nations passed the ball more than Slovakia did in the group stages, although and the qualifiers. But at times it was pretty sterile. They weren't often passing the ball. They didn't pass the ball forward as much as I would imagine a manager who wants their team to pass that often does. They're pretty, I think they're kind of vulnerable. Like, they're obviously missing Martin Dubravka, the Newcastle keeper. So a guy that's Fulham's sub keeper will probably play for him. They're missing their left back, which isn't ideal. So they've drafted in. They'll probably play a guy whose name I've now forgotten, but plays domestically in Slovakia. So he hopefully can't be up to much. And also, they may have a very serious issue in midfield because Stanislav Lobotka, without there, they'd be kind of lobotomized because he's their main.
Oh, I like that.
Pivot. I know that. guess
40 minutes for that.
End the Zoom call.
He's their main pivot in midfield. Like, he's their version of James McCarthy, for want of a much better comparison. So he drops off. He'll take the ball off the central defenders and break lines with passes to Hamsik and co further ahead of him. But he's at Napoli and they're all quarantined under the threat with suspected COVID cases. Like, they didn't turn up for their game against Juventus last weekend. So Marek Hamsik is back with the squad because he missed the last internationals through quarantine. But if they're missing Lobotka, that's a massive blow for Slovakia. And get that, hopefully he's all right, etc. But it would be good news for Ireland.
And that's what Kenny, like Stephen Kenny did spoke about him last week, just as of how important he is. He was asked about Hamsik, and then he turned the question around and brought up Lobotka in terms of, like, as Gav said there, he's the fella who things pretty much go through, and he's not just the type who'll get a ball off the centre halves and then pass it to the fullback, which he obviously can still do. He can be patient. He's the type of fella Kenny was talking about, how he breaks forward, like as this centre midfielder. He tries to drive forward. So if he's not there, and just even looking through some of the Slovakian press, with the help of Google Translate, which is quite fun. But like they're really worried about this. Like, genuinely, they're really concerned, saying he's not there. This is a huge blow. Like, this for them, they're saying this is the game of the year for them, which I suppose in 2020 is saying a lot. But like what really is, he really is someone for them who they look at. Like, I know obviously you wouldn't know a huge amount of about him, but for them he is sort of like a figure who, well, if he's not in the team, just again going off what I've been reading about him, that they really worry of it kind of disrupts the flow of what they're about. And like Hamsik, he's been playing in China, he's obviously got great caliber in terms of, like, he's the record goal scorer and all the rest of it, but he's not at the same level as he was, you know. So like you've also got the lad Kuka as well, who's with Parma. Like you've got Hamsik who's like 33 and Kuka who's 33 as well. So being ageist here, like you kind of think, well, it's just a team who can be got at in midfield. This is a team who needs to be up against lads who are going to properly put it up to them as well as like physically as well as kind of just in terms of athleticism. But it's it's I think if Slovakia, it doesn't look as if he's going to play. Like they're trying to get him out. There seems to be a lot of work going on behind the scenes there between Slovakian FA and that people. It doesn't look as if he's actually going to feature, which could again hand the initiative to Ireland.
Yeah, they sound like Ireland, but with even more problems, to be honest. Where's the value for money here, Johnny, looking at it from a betting point of view? And I guess we can get into predictions before we start talking about Dundalk, but where would you be putting your money, or where will you be putting your money, Johnny?
It's tricky, you know. I'm still kind of slightly up in the air about behind closed doors. I was reading this morning a piece, I think, in the Guardian where, you know, these academics looked into it and there hasn't been a massive change in results, but like anecdotally, even in the League of Ireland, the last 2 first division rounds of games, there've been 10 games, 10 away wins, and you know, I just see it as a major plus that a team that to me still lacks confidence in many ways, players playing within themselves, just they've been beaten down by the way they've been asked to play to a large extent for years. And I think Ireland will go in there without that factor. I think that's a big thing. If this game were in the Aviva Stadium, to me, I wouldn't make Ireland much more in terms of favourites or their prices. They're 2-1 to win the game. Slovakia are favourites at just over 6-4, 31-20. 2 bets for me. One of them is really harping back to the past, but I think it's still realistic. I think both teams to score at even money. Basically, if one team goes ahead, the other team will have to go all out to score at some stage. And I don't trust us defensively at all at the moment. I thought we were very, very poor in both games, actually, to be honest. I thought Duffy was miles off it defensively, as he pretty much admitted himself, despite the fact he ended up scoring. So I think even money, both teams to score. I'd fancy us to nick one as well, definitely. I think, you know, the fact McGoldrick scored at the weekend, considering how poor his scoring record is, and the fact Connolly, you know, is in good form for Brighton, pretty much set up a goal at the weekend, albeit a bad mistake. My other one, I mean, I've gone out on an absolute limb here, but 9-1 Shane Duffy to score the first or last goal. I mean, just look at the Bulgaria game. He must have had 3 or 4 like good or very good chances from set pieces. He's clearly a target. As much as, you know, even if you did as much opposition analysis as Gavin Cooney did, you'd still wouldn't take you that long to figure out that Duffy's a threat from set pieces. He's basically our biggest threat. Now, I think we will become more of a team that will actually create chances in general play, but he's still a threat, and I think 9-1 first or last goal scorer is perfectly fair.
Yeah, it was funny with Duffy, Gav, wasn't it, when he scored that goal, that people were kind of making the joke, the more things change and so on. But like, it has been a hallmark of Kenny teams to be strong from set pieces. Just because he likes to pass the ball around doesn't mean that we should lose any of that threat with our big man there in the air. Going to get a prediction off you before we round off with Dundalk. What are you thinking this week?
Well, I think Ireland will win. Do I think Ireland will win? I think I need to believe that Ireland can win to get us through.
Slightly different, to be fair.
The eternal grimness that surrounds us. But I think it'll be 1-1 in full time, and we'll win 2-1 in extra time.
Yeah, 1-1. It's 3-1 a draw on both teams to score. Yeah, it just looks very, very possible. We do major in draws as well, like valiant draws, crap draws, just draws. We draw.
I'm raging because I was trying to find the market for like over and under on square passes, because I think that's what's going to that could actually be a big one. Like in terms of the score, I think it's going to I don't know. I think Slovakia will win. I think they'll probably win 2-1.
Oh Jesus, Dave.
Yeah. I know, but like I don't know. Yeah, just I don't know. Maybe just like a lot of the Ireland players, I've just been I'm still scarred by the past. That's what Kenny has to get rid of. Kenny has to just kind of get rid of some of the scars.
Deep there, Dave.
I know. Yeah. Well, it is Monday morning and the country's on the verge of lockdown, so
yeah.
But I think I'm excited. I'm excited to see how Aaron Connolly and David McGoldrick could possibly link up, and that's why even one of the bets I was looking at was Aaron Connolly to score any time. It was like 16-5. I think I think just the prospect of McGoldrick, just his cleverness and his ability to pick passes, rather than just long balls, I think his ability to kind of thread stuff through for someone like Connolly could actually be a good way for Ireland to score two if possible. But I just think Slovakia might just edge it 2-1.
Right, well, we'll end that segment on the most somber of notes. I thought I could depend on you, Dave, with some green-eyed optimism, but maybe we can be a little bit more cheerful chatting about Dundalk, particularly in light of the fact that they drew Arsenal, Dave. Starting with yourself, just like, I don't know, what was your reaction to that draw? I guess, on the one hand, for most League of Ireland fans who want to see Dundalk do well in the competition now that they're there, who want to have actually feasible means of going through the group. They weren't a million miles off a few years ago. At the same time, though, you want to see them have these massive games. And there's maybe a little bit of a mixture of both in this group. They are up against it naturally enough, but it could be the perfect group in a way, where you have this marquee fixture in a couple of games where you could look at potentially taking a scalp if you're on song.
Is that to me? Sorry, is that to me?
Sorry, that's to you, Dave. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. My first reaction when the draw was made, it was Arsenal and Dundalk. I was thinking, yes, gonna get to see Gunnosaurus in the flesh, and now that's just been ruined. Gone. Like,
our thoughts are with them, yeah, or her.
How are you more negative than me this morning, Dave? This is unbelievable.
No, you know, well, you talk. This is Jason's now. Maybe even more negativity is coming. That was my first reaction as well. I was thinking this is actually a great draw for Dundalk. You've got a bit of glamour there with Arsenal, and then you've got a couple of games against, say, like some Molde, Vienna, who. But then you look at it and you're sort of thinking, it's going to be very tough. Like, if Dundalk can get a couple of draws out of these games, they're going to be doing well. Like, I think that is the best that they can just hope for, in the sense that, like, in 2016, it was a case of, it was just an amazing achievement on the back of qualifying, because of obviously just how they did it, like the way even through qualifiers, and obviously like the game, the 3-0 in Tallaght against Bate, wasn't it? Bate? Yeah,
Bate Barca. Yeah.
It's only a few years ago, but you're just like, that felt like a team with Kenny, obviously with Stephen Kenny as manager. You're thinking this is something special. Like, they had very quickly built a team that was just really, really impressive and a great style of play. Whereas with Dundalk this year, like, it doesn't just quite feel the same. Obviously, it's a great achievement. Like, there's still a lot of players there who set the same faces, but it doesn't have that same sense of, this is a team who have been building like towards this. They've almost like stumbled their way in, really. And it's, I don't know, I hope this is a level as well where you're thinking the manager's coming in, like, obviously Filippo Giovanelli, and he steadied the ship a little bit in terms of, I think a lot of people were expecting Justice to be an absolute disaster. Like, and clearly it hasn't. He's got fellas on board, but you're now in the group stages of the Europa League, and it's just, how is this going to go? It could be an absolute disaster, or it could be amazing again. But that's, I don't think it's going to go. I don't think there will be a middle ground with this, which is sad in terms of how it to be. I hope for some of those Dundalk players who are there, that they can really discover some of their best form. I think maybe the nature of it, maybe it will bring a bit of, hopefully see them rise to the occasion a little bit. But I just think if they can get a couple of draws, if they can nick a win, that first game maybe having a home could help, and give it could help. But yeah, it's going to be very tough. It's going to be very, very difficult. It doesn't feel the same. I don't know, maybe it's just because you've got an American investment firm in there running the show. It just doesn't feel the same as 2016. I don't have that same sense of romanticism about it of what I was a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same either, Johnny. Like, it's different in nearly every way, isn't it? Like, even if you look at Dundalk, as it stands, they're sixth in the Premier Division table. Like, they're struggling to get back into Europe next year. You know what I mean? So, like, it does feel manifestly different to that team under Kenny, which at the time felt like one of the best teams the league had produced in many years, if not ever, in the modern era. So, as Dave says, like, they did well to get it. Like, it's an unbelievable achievement. You talked about, like, Kenny earlier with getting Ireland into the Euros being an unbelievable achievement. Like, probably not, but like, with this Dundalk team, any League of Ireland team getting into the group stages of European competition, it is a great achievement. And yet, you're kind of looking at them probably through a completely different lens to the way we would have been looking at that Dundalk team who beat Bade and drew with that said, and whoever else. So, like, it feels like the odds are completely stacked against them here, probably, and that just being as kind of annoying as it seems, just being there is the achievement. Like that, to expect too much would be maybe a bit naive this time around.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, you know, anything I say about Dundalk now, Dundalk fans just seem to jump on it as if I don't like the club. And like, I loved what Dundalk have done, but what exactly what Dave said, would have loved the Dundalk of 2016 as a completely different entity to the 2020 version. The 2016 team, it's basically, you know, a couple of mates in Dundalk had plucked that team from obscurity, gone up to Donegal to get Stephen Kenny, who was himself in obscurity at the time, to take over a team of has-beens and a bunch of players that had basically kind of, some were flirting with leaving the game altogether. And within a few years, they went Dane Massey's header against Zenit in Tala. If he scores that, they probably win that game. They're top of the group after 3 games. A seriously good group as well in terms of the rankings of those teams. And I went to those games and absolutely loved it. You were having pints with the lads who effectively owned the club, who themselves had kind of just landed on this massive windfall, and it was great. Effectively, this season's qualification is effectively plugging the financial hole that Peak 6 has gotten itself into through a lot of misfortune, admittedly, but it's basically covering the losses of 2019 and 2020 financially in the region of 3 million. Apart from that, you know, there isn't a lot of romanticism about it, apart from the fact that the players have achieved something that is still very difficult to achieve. I think Dundalk have been essentially at the very, very best, they've been bang average in Europe this year. And I'd argue they've actually been pretty poor. I thought Sheriff were really, really poor compared to what they should have been. The Andorran team were basically a Leinster Senior League side, or a glorified Leinster Senior League side. They were no good. And the Faroese team, as Pat Hoban said during the week, they got to be beating them. They got to be beating the Andorran team. But Pat Hoban said a very interesting thing as well. It was on Off the Ball. He said, I don't really think the Aviva Stadium suits us. And that's going to be a massive problem for them in the groups, where they've teams that can exploit the wide spaces. Dundalk are miles off where they were. They're like, you only need to look at their league form, right? So they lost against Sligo. They conceded 3 goals in Sligo. They should have lost against Watford. That was during Vinny's reign. Since Giovanni has come in, they drew 0-0 against Hearts yesterday at home. And that was he made a really big gamble there in resting a lot of players. So I didn't think he really needed to. They'd obviously, their league form has been okay. They conceded 2 at home to Shells, who look like they're in relegation trouble. I think Dundalk are miles off where they were in 2016. So the thing is, can they kind of bridge the gap mentally? Because I thought against Harps there were some signs, particularly defensively, that they were getting there a bit more. They didn't create many chances at home to Harps. They've had lots of midfield kind of changes, this and that. They've had massive managerial problems. The dressing room was clearly half lost or lost under Vinnie Perth. They have a guy come in now who's basically a lot to prove. Personally, I think the group stages on their current form would be something of a potential absolute bloodbath. Like, I could see Arsenal hockeying them, and Vienna could beat them comfortably. Molde could beat them comfortably. There's nothing in their form this season that suggests they're not really vulnerable. They're 33-1 with Hills to win the group. They should be 33 million to 1, admittedly, but I would fear for them. I'd fear for them big time. They don't have any crowd at home. Arsenal are obviously miles ahead. If Shamrock Rovers were in this group, I think I'd be confident they could get 4 or 5 points maybe. They've already beaten Norwegian opposition in Brann. Molde would be at least somewhat beatable. But the way Dundalk are playing at the moment, and this includes on European form, this is a potential bloodbath for them. And they, whether they like it or not, that's how it is. And I just hope it isn't. And they have the players, they still have the players to get a lot closer, but they're not playing well. And anyone who thinks they are playing well doesn't know anything about football, as far as I'm concerned.
So, Gav, I presume you'll tell me they're not playing well as well. What do you make of this group stage for them? Like, bloodbath, as Johnny says, is I don't know, 2 points, a couple of draws, potentially 1 win, a mammoth success in the context of this, or?
Yeah, I think it is. So, I mean, Stephen Kenny's team got 4 points, wasn't it, in 2016? Like, Giovanni, I think he said it with a glint of a smile that the target is to get 5. I think they'll get 0, to be honest. I don't want to be disrespectful, because regardless of the opposition, it's a good achievement. It's a very good achievement for a League of Ireland side to win 3 European games on the spin in consecutive weeks, with 2 of them away from home. Now, look, they got a good draw. They earned that partly by going the Champions route, by winning the league last season, but they did benefit from a good draw. Like, to beat the champions of Andorra, Moldova, and the Faroe Islands to get to the Europa League group stages is an easier path to riches than I think any League of Ireland club could have even asked for, never mind have had in the past. It's still an achievement to go and beat what's in front of them. I mean, I'm of an age where I can remember Longford Town imploding against Carmarthen Town, and that's something that I'm still obviously struggling to get over. But I think they'll be doing very well to get a point in the group. And the draw wasn't bad for them. Like, they get Arsenal for a bit of glamour and plenty of attention, and that'll be a great thing for the players. Perhaps not in the moment, but definitely after they retire to look back on it. And Rapid Vienna were ranked the weakest team in pot 2. Molde were the second weakest team in pot 3, but Dundalk unfortunately are by a distance the weakest team in pot 4. So I am charmed by the story more than Johnny is. I'm charmed by the Giovagnoli story, just because the guy is in the Europa League group stages, having not managed an adult team before. Like, it is completely berserk even by 2020 standards. But without being disrespectful to the squad, I think that they have benefited from a large slice of fortune to get here, and I think they'll be doing pretty well to land themselves with anything other than 6 defeats.
On that, I think Zenit and Alkmaar, when they were in their pots, I think they were first and second, if I remember. Dundalk had a much more difficult group, and I wasn't actually aware how low they were in the pots, Gavin, which certainly creates an interesting situation for Arsenal, who couldn't have really gotten a weaker group by the sounds of it. But just the one thing that the crumb of hope, Giovagnoli has gotten the players smiling again, which they weren't. And secondly, if you put out Dundalk's best team or something close to it, it's still more than capable of getting a result in that group. To me, they're just not playing like a team that is capable of getting a result in that group.
I think one thing you can look at in terms of the group is there's players there, like a good batch of them there. Just call them out, like Gary Rogers, Sean Gannon, Andy Boyle, Brian Garton, Dane Massey, Chris Shields, John Mountney, obviously Patrick McElhenney, David McMillan, who won't start, who all were involved in 2016. So and even you add in Mickey Duffy in there as well, who obviously came out in terms of his experience in the last few years. You've got that. It's not as if they've I know I said they stumbled there just in terms of just their form. Like they were very lucky against KO. I thought KO came back and actually looked pretty impressive against, and they could have easily nicked a couple of goals. Like even just before Daniel Kelly got that tour goal in the Aviva, like the Ferros, they missed a great chance when it was pulled back. They could have easily had got back into the game. But like, that's one thing that I think, for as much as they haven't played well, they have got so much experience. They've got experience in that team of playing in the group stages already, and you would hope that will stand to them. So like, they're not, I would hope, going to just capitulate against, say, a Molde or a Rapid Vienna. I think those teams do, especially maybe Vienna. I think Molde could be the team who on a similar par to them. Well, in terms of quality wise, like obviously the Arsenal game, you're just hoping they can just nick something if they can. Like, I don't know, they're on a completely different level. Like, that's a club that they'll be looking at. They'll be thinking we shouldn't even be in the Europa League, So, but again, it was one of the things, like in 2016, was, look, you literally went to every game, travelled, and there was some of the moments like Patrick McElhenney hitting the bar against Zenit. Moments like this, and you're kind of stuff that was coming back to me over the last while just after that. And there was so many times where you saw those players had the quality to do things, and there's players in that Dundalk team who have quality to hurt some of these opponents. It's just whether or not Giovagnoli can actually get them confident, get them playing. You think maybe because it is a completely different competition to the league, and obviously the fact that they can't win the league, some of their motivation probably has gone, that maybe in the Europa League this will just bring something extra out of that group of players, because it's a group of players who shouldn't be, as Johnny said, shouldn't be discounted. They just haven't been playing well, and if they can somehow get off of in that first game, they can get off in a good start somehow and get something there, that could be the catalyst for a decent campaign.
I think the Pats game, Gavin, is going to be fascinating Friday. They're playing a team that's definitely in form at the moment. Stephen O'Donnell knows them very well. They'll basically have their best team out or very close to it. I think that'll be much more telling in terms of where Dundalk are than a lot of recent games. I'm fascinated to see how that goes.
Where's the value for money then in this group, Johnny? If you've had a chance to look at that, like, are we looking at Dundalk losing their games to make ourselves feel a small bit better? In terms of putting a bet on it, or
yeah, I that definitely wouldn't be a bet that would appeal to me, because I'd be cheering them on, and I get massive kick out of
Irish teams playing in Europe. You know, the Dundalk model is not as romantic as if Bows were there, as even if Shamrock Rovers were there, or Derry City this season. You know, it is what it is at this stage. They've been there, they've had plenty of money and all that, but like the group is basically 1-10 Arsenal, 8-1 Rapid Vienna, 20-1 Molde, 33-1 Dundalk. I just probably look elsewhere for that, and maybe keep an eye on Hill's prices for the Pats Dundalk game at the weekend. I think that'll be interesting. I think Pats are going to give them a very big game on recent form. But like I'm praying that Dundalk squad, I don't think you'll meet a better bunch of lads. And whatever it is, what happened during the Vinnie Perth era, I don't know. But there was obviously something wrong. I thought the Celje game, I thought Celje were there for the taking and they lost 3-0. And it was just symptomatic of where they were at the time. If they're going to lose 3-0 in a game like that, you'd fear for them in the group. But hopefully they'll have improved by then.
Well, Johnny, Gav, and Dave, thanks a million for your time, gents. We'll do it again soon, no doubt about it. Thanks to everybody as well for tuning in. You've been watching The Punt, which is brought to you by The42 and William Hill. Please gamble responsibly, and for more information, visit dunlewy.net. So until next time, mind yourselves and take it easy.